Welcome to the Center for Urban Engagement, or CUE's third lecture of the year. My name is Krista Tooley, and I direct the Center for Urban Engagement, an academic center at Wheaton College, which exists to promote just, sustainable, and flourishing urban communities through the academic studies of cities and transformational experiences of urban life. Tonight's speaker, Dr. Laura Zumdahl, brings almost 20 years of experience addressing core concerns of CUE in the nonprofit sector, where she has served in leadership roles in capacity building, higher ed, legal aid, and child welfare. Tonight, Dr. Zumdahl will speak to us about pursuing justice, whether in full-time work for social change or integrating a concern for justice into another career. Her expertise offers us all an on-the-ground perspective on social justice and anti-poverty work from the lens of a human services agency in Chicago. So I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, Dr. Laura Zumdahl, CEO of New Moms, a nonprofit dedicated to strengthening families by partnering with young moms as they progress towards housing stability, economic mobility, and family well-being. Dr. Zumdahl has been recognized for her excellence in leadership by the Axelson Center for Nonprofit Leadership with a 20 Years and 20 Leaders Award. She serves as a trustee of Trinity Christian College as a board member of Advancing Nonprofits and was appointed by the governor to the Youth Budget Commission. Dr. Zumdahl has been quoted or published in Forbes, the Chicago Tribune, and the Christian Science Monitor. So we are so grateful that Dr. Zumdahl has joined us here tonight to discuss with us the vocation of social justice. Will you please join me in welcoming Dr. Zumdahl.
As Julie said, I'm not a Wheaton alumni, but my husband is. I'm married to one, and my stepdaughter is a soon-to-be one in less than a semester. So another one in the family, and I'm very familiar with the Equitas program here because she's part of that as well. And so I'm excited to be here tonight to talk to you about something that matters immensely to me in my own life, social justice work, and how our lives intersect with it, and how we can impact it. So I hope there's something you can take away from that. So over the course of the next few minutes together, I want to share a little bit about what I have learned through my career working in social justice and anti-poverty work. I'll talk about one way of understanding poverty work and how organizations can address it on the ground. And I'll share with you a bit about my work leading the organization that I'm part of called New Moms in Chicago, where we focus on young moms and kids. And hopefully you'll walk away tonight thinking a little bit about your own calling and vocation and your calling to kingdom work, and how the topics that we talk about tonight might dive into, how they might impact your vocation and the way you think about your own career plans. So 2 decades, a little bit more than that maybe, 2 decades ago when I was a Christian college student, like yourselves, I was kind of stuck in a bit of my own existential crisis, thinking about what I wanted to do with my life. Is that anyone here? Perhaps? Maybe? Okay, good. Yes, I'm right there with you. Yes. Thinking about that, right? I had grown up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor, so I was really familiar with ministry work, right? I knew about church work. I knew about ministries. I was really familiar with that. Things that I'll call kingdom work. I knew what that was. I did not want to do that, right? That was not going to be my full-time vocation work. I was pretty confident that wasn't it. I'd been on short-term mission trips. I'll tell you, in hindsight, I think those were mostly more about me than they were about the work I was doing and mission trips, right? But I had done some of that, and I'd been exposed to a lot of the ways that, frankly, white middle-class churches and Christian institutions do ministry work, and I was just pretty confident that I was not being called to do that in my life in some formal way, that kind of ministry work in some way. And so if I didn't want to do that, and I thought, well, my interests and my passions and my skills lay somewhere else, I was kind of stuck. And I contemplated how could I use business or economics and some of the things I was interested in How could those professions provide career paths for me? Ones that perhaps could help me pay off the growing student loan debt that I was acquiring in order to put myself through Christian college, which is the situation that I was finding myself in at that moment, right? But at the same time, I really felt this stirring in my soul that I will largely characterize as some sort of a nudge to do something more with my life, to do something that was really this burgeoning interest in social justice. I was burdened with trying to figure out how I could do something with what I was learning about the world around me. I was frustrated by my lack of ability to do what felt like much within my circle of control as a college student. And that had started really several years before. And several of you have probably had some moments in your life that you feel like maybe were a little bit life-defining for you. And maybe not yet. Maybe these moments will still happen for you. They happen for all of us. I'll say you're probably going to have several of these moments in your life, what I'll think of as like life-defining moments. If you haven't had one yet, it's going to happen. It might be at like 25 or 35 or 55. It's going to happen. They're going to come probably repeatedly. And there are moments in your life where something starts to click and your perspective starts to shift a little bit, and you realize something that's just a little different than you felt a few minutes before, and you go, oh, or like, right? Like, there are moments that I think are best described by sounds like that, because you literally have this like moment of, that's different, right? Something, that can be something small, and it really can only matter to you, but there's some sort of moment like that. So let me tell you about one that mattered to me. I was 16 years old, and I was given a copy of a book written by a sociologist by the name of Ron Sider called Rich Christians in the Age of Hunger. And I was reading this book in the back of my mom's brown minivan in Lafayette, Indiana. And I was working my way through this book, and I was reading about the atrocities of hunger around the world, and about our relative power to do something about that, right? Our ability to like distribute wealth in ways that would alleviate hunger, to feed people, to keep people alive, and the fact that Christians knew about this and weren't doing anything about this. And I had this moment where I looked up and I thought, what the expletive? Right, that was a moment for me. It was a life-defining moment. I didn't know what to do with that. I felt really angry. I felt really frustrated. I didn't know what to do with it, but it was a moment for me. And you might have had a moment like that, or you will, where something clicks in you where you think like, oh, I'm not okay with this, or this something here, something is happening that I need to pay attention to in my own life, right? Like something here is giving me a clue about the future. Because I couldn't, in my teenage mind at that moment, I couldn't understand how we, the collective we as Christians, who are called to help the poor, the sick, the needy, the orphan, right? I couldn't understand how we were ignoring the hungry. I couldn't understand how Christians who were rich by world standards were ignoring the plight of our brothers and sisters. I couldn't fathom how we could know better and not do better. And so something shifted in me, and that was my first like, oh, moment. And it shifted me really, eventually, towards a lifetime of pursuing anti-poverty work, and opened up my eyes to eventually understanding that the pursuit of social justice is really essential to living out my faith as a Christian. And I can't do one without the other. And so I'll tell you what, I still, in my life today, on a regular basis, I sit in my office in Chicago, and I learn about some injustice that happens in the city around me, and not even halfway around the world, right? And I look up and I go, what the expletive? Right? Because I'm still regularly frustrated by moments of injustice in the world around me. That same nudge, that same feeling that ticked me off years ago still is there today. My path looks different, I'm doing different things, but that same holy fire and discontent still is there today. That's still real. I'm still as angry. I'm still just as fired up about injustice today, and I've learned now how to use my vocation to do something about it. Excuse me. I'm fighting bronchitis, so excuse me while I take some water break. Now, for you, that may look really different. It may be something else that gets you really fired up in a different way in your own life. It may be a different moment that's going to stir your soul about something. It may be something else that makes you deeply concerned about humanity. I'm assuming there's something because you showed up tonight and to talk about social justice, so there must be something that is somewhat appealing to you about this. Maybe there's a nudge that you're feeling from God in a totally different direction. But whatever it is, I hope that you're going to take a listen to it, because those are the moments that God uses to push us on the path that he has ahead for us to do his will and his work. And when I went to figure out how do I translate that passion into some sort of actual vocation, I was pretty stumped. When I talked to my advisors in college, they wisely suggested graduate school, which was good, but then I was stuck in this struggle of trying to figure out, like, do I keep studying the phenomenon that I'm really interested in, like society and poverty, because that's really fascinating, or do I actually do something to help? And like, what does that look like? And at the same time, I had some real practicalities to contend with in my own life. I remember I sat my parents down to suggest that I was going to go to graduate school for social work, and they were really concerned about that. Several issues they raised. First, financially, because I was putting myself through college and graduate school, and they weren't, given what they knew about income potential in social work, they weren't sure about the sustainability of that plan. Second of all, the idea of me, their firstborn child, and what they knew about me being a therapist, which is what they had conjured up as the image of a social worker, was not jiving in their minds at all. And so they were struggling with that. And my academic advisor said, I remember I talked to him, and he said, what do you want to do? And I said, is there some sort of thing where you're like a social worker, but with spreadsheets and managing people and organizations or something? And he kind of looked at me and he said, I have no idea. And I was like, me neither. We're going to have to figure this out, right? So frankly, most people didn't know it. Now today, there's been a burgeoning development of like academic disciplines around a field of nonprofit management, public administration. There's degree programs you can do for getting the job that I have today. And so there's actual ways that you can do that. It's become a much more readily available academic discipline and given a little bit more legitimacy along the way. But the truth is, there's this whole network of organizations across the United States, and I'll just really talk about the United States tonight, but that are doing really great work in the anti-poverty and social justice space. And there's a plethora of roles and occupations within it that allows people to use their talents and professions to turn out to further social justice work. Because it turns out in the end, you don't have to be a social worker to work towards social justice. Not at all. Like my narrow mindset of that was not actually what it needed to be. And I didn't know that then. But I knew, and what I know now, is that what often happens is that helping professions often what ends up happening is that they get sidelined and minimized, right? In America, we rely really heavily on those who help people for a living, people like healthcare workers, as we've seen in the pandemic, teachers, social workers, community developers, ministers, caregivers, the list goes on. We end up really kind of diminishing their status by paying them less in our economy. But really, those are the folks whose professions probably align the closest with God's heart, right? Like they're offering this work. And they're the folks that jobs aren't valued the most in our economy. And you may start to see a really familiar phenomenon of this when you start to near the end of your time here at Wheaton. In fact, some of your classmates will probably firmly plant themselves on a path forward towards a traditional helping profession. Others won't and will follow a different vocational trajectory. There's nothing wrong with that, but I do think we go astray when we leave school, when those who leave school to go into business or science or other professions also leave the work of social justice to those who have it as their day jobs. It's everybody's job. It's everybody's job as a Christian. It's everybody's job as a human. We can't relegate social justice work just to the ministries or the parachurch organizations or the faith-based or the overtly Christian organizations. Because when we do, we end up putting these boundaries around it and we eliminate it from the scope of people's career plans. And then two things happen. First, we minimize it for those who choose to embrace it as their careers. Often, these helping professions end up being heavily female-dominated. And when they're feminized, the helping professions become less valued. It's lower paid work. A call into this work as your full-time vocation doesn't make you less valuable than someone who feels a calling to a more lucrative profession. And when we don't value this work economically, not just emotionally, we reinforce systems that make it harder for those whose careers and professions in these areas to do so and economically survive. And it's this terrible reinforcing cycle that happens over and over. And second, we let those who don't have social justice off as their day jobs off the hook. We let them off the hook for something that's really at the heart of the tenets of Christianity. We pretend that we don't all, as part of the collective Christian community of faith, have a role in solving it, have a responsibility to own up to it or to live to it. And so you may have heard a classmate say, well, you know, we need good Christians in business, right? As they think about their own career paths, right? And they're right, we do need good Christians in business, absolutely. We need Christians in business who relentlessly pursue justice, who are going to speak up about it in the workplace, who are going to devote their resources to it, who are going to care about it like they care about their day job. We need them because it should be part of their vocation too. It's not something that you do on the side. It should be part of your vocation, whatever your job is. Because we actually need all of us together in this. Regardless of what your career path is, we need Christians to all be committed to justice and eliminating poverty. We need to stand up for our brothers and sisters and figure out how we can collectively advance those who don't have the same privileges as we who are in this room here tonight. And that's leadership. So whatever your vocation is, being a leadership means pursuing justice with your resources. And when we talk about justice, we have to talk about poverty because the two are really intertwined together. The unequal distribution of wealth is a huge factor in injustice. The two concepts are really closely linked. You know this, I know, from your studies, right? And poverty can mean poor in spirit, yes. But, right, poverty also means like poor in your pocket. Like I don't have enough money to eat. I don't have enough money to go to the doctor or to get dental care or to buy a coat because it is really cold out there tonight. Or I don't have enough money to buy my books or the fees, because there are fees for absolutely everything we do in life, aren't there, right? Poverty is not having enough, and it's a nasty cycle. Without having money, you have to spend more time and effort doing even the most basic things, which then keeps you from getting ahead, and then you can't make more money, which starts that cycle all over again. It's this ruthless, demoralizing, hard to break out of cycle. And whether you decide to form your vocation around social justice or be engaged in another way, you're going to find that the issue that you probably care about the most, or the organization that you're drawn to because you like their work, probably is centered around poverty. Do you care about kids in foster care? What's the number one reason most kids are in the care of the state? Poverty. Do you care about sex trafficking? What's the number one reason sex trafficking exists? Poverty. Do you care about domestic violence? What's the number one reason women and children are in violent situations? Poverty. Do you care about the environment? Who suffers most? Impoverished communities. Poverty is the big answer for a lot of these issues. It is so intertwined. There's most often a link between the causes and the issues that are going to be close to your heart as poverty. And the thing is, poverty is really hard to solve because it's really complex and it's complicated by a million factors. There's all these individual actors and decisions, and there's regulations, and as I'll talk about in just a minute, there's even physiological conditions. Billions of people around the world are trapped in poverty, millions in the United States. And most of the organizations that you can think of as helping organizations, nonprofits, parachurch organizations, charities, ministries, whatever you want to call them, we end up addressing poverty. It's what we do. It's at the core of it. And so it's really, really important to understand this, which is why I want to spend a few minutes tonight diving into this. And it's entrenched for a few reasons. And I know you've probably studied this pretty extensively, and if you've been in any urban studies classes, right? You know that historical, systemic issues contribute to cycles of poverty, and especially in urban communities that can be really challenging to overcome. Racism, disinvestment in communities, marginalizations, these are systems of evil forces that create conditions of poverty and keep people in them. And let's be clear, as Christians, we have not just been complicit in creating those systems, but in keeping people in them, right? We are part of the problem. We collectively, as people who hold to a Christian heritage, are not blameless. And the very cause that is close to Christ's heart, those who are poor, are often ignored or worse, reinforced by Christians in our actions. But I actually imagine that you might know a little less about what happens to people's brains when they're in poverty. And this is actually really important for you to understand when you think about what are solutions on the ground level to poverty. Because if you want to be a helper in some sort of way, if you want to work to alleviate poverty and address injustice, then you have to understand the full picture and not just the bigger systemic issues to develop effective solutions and create the right conditions for lifting people out of poverty. And we know more now about how people's brains work and a brain science understanding of this than we ever have. It's actually a great time to be alive in the world because our research is awesome. So understanding poverty at a physiological level is one really important component actually to helping you understand why people may stay in poverty at times and why it's really hard to solve. So I want to share tonight for a minute a little bit about the brain science perspective of poverty and to help you understand about the impact. And then in turn, how organizations have to be really savvy about thinking about how this turns into solutions and like program design and that sort of thing that organizations might develop for ways that they can address this. And I might give you a little bit of insight into your own life too. So on the screen are 12 brain-based abilities that we all have in our lives that govern how we organize, how we react, and how we get things done. These kind of act like an air traffic control system for our brain. We call these things executive skills. Sometimes folks call them executive functioning skills or like core capabilities. I'm going to use the language of executive skills tonight. Now we all have executive skills, strengths, and struggles. All of us in this room. Now, I can tell you, if you look at this list, you can already probably start to think like, oh, I can think of some of those that I'm really good at, or think of some where you might have a struggle, right? Take a moment. I can tell you, I've got some struggles. Like, I'm really good at organization and planning and prioritization. I'm really good at those. I struggle a little bit with task initiation and working memory, right? So that just happens to me that then I'm really good at organizing things, but like when it comes to getting them done, I've got to have some strategies in my toolkit for like how I get them done, right? Like I have to think about that. We all have these. We do all of these things and we all have them to various degrees. So take a minute, think about your own. All right, got an idea? Well, when we have experiences of poverty in our lives and experiences of scarcity, not having enough of something, poverty, even things like racism, systemic racism, trauma that can happen, a lack of supportive relationships in our lives, those things can affect the development of these skills in our lives. Because we all need these in order to do anything, right? To survive in life, to be successful at school, at work, finding a job, finding an apartment, keeping it, all those things. We have to have these things, right? And we struggle with those and with developing those when we have trauma, when poverty, when those things are happening. Now, think for a minute about a time in which you experienced some sort of scarcity. Maybe it was like a scarcity of sleep. Maybe it was like finals week when you weren't sleeping very much. Remember when we were like, no one in America had toilet paper during the pandemic, right? Or maybe it was like you were really hungry. You were like super hungry, right? Like, how did you when you had that moment of scarcity? Were you able to stay really calm and collected? Or did you move to hangry? Right? Were you ever afraid you weren't going to get what you needed? Like, there were people in America who were very afraid they were not going to get toilet paper again. When you felt like you couldn't focus, when you were focused on the thing that you couldn't have, it's hard to think about something that's far off in the long term, right? It's hard to focus on a goal that's complicated, that's complex, that's far off, when you really are focused on the thing that you need in the moment, right? So when that happens, we end up doing something what our brain calls tunneling. So like when you're really hungry, all you can think about is like, I need something to eat, right? Our brain is doing something called tunneling. All you can think about is I'm hungry. You're not thinking about what job should I get after college? And am I gonna like be able to like appropriately set myself up well for that job? All you can think is I need lunch and I need to find some lunch right now because I'm so hungry and I'm in that moment. Your brain is tunneling on the one thing it needs right in front of it. You can't focus on the big thing that's ahead of it. Ahead of you, like long off in a far away. We're wired in our brains to focus on the thing that we need for survival in that moment. That tunneling is like a natural thing that our brain does because our brains are wired to help us survive. Get the thing we need in that moment to survive. And when our brains experience that trauma or scarcity over and over again for a really prolonged period of time, then we move from what we call like positive or tolerable stress, which is when we have something for like a short period of time, we move to something called toxic stress, which is really damaging. It's damaging to people's brains, and it moves us away to a feeling that's intolerable for folks. Positive stress can be a good thing. I'm really stressed out because I have to give this presentation, but my roommates they come around me and say like, you can do it, you can handle it. Like, you can manage that, right? You can even have positive stress moments like if you're out hiking and you run into a bear on the path, you freak out, but you like have a moment of adrenaline and you run away. That's a positive stress moment. Like, your body can handle that, right? But if you have experiences over and over again of not having enough to eat, or not knowing where you're going to sleep, or being concerned about your safety, those things over time start to damage your brain, and you have this toxic stress that's happening. The prolonged activation of your body's brain and the toxic stress that's happened to it, the stress response system that's happening, acts a lot like an overloaded truck, like this picture. Eventually, the stress just gets too heavy to bear. Like, it just keeps adding more and more weight to that truck. And it just can't go on. Like, the truck eventually just stops moving. Like, the brain's just like, I can't do this. I can't go on. And that's the experience of what people feel like after they've been living in poverty and scarcity for really prolonged periods of time. So at an organization like the one that I lead at New Moms, we have to understand this and be really prepared to deal with it. If someone shows up in a moment of crisis, it's not the best opening line to say, well, let's talk about what you're going to do in 8 years down the road, right? Because if you are hungry or don't know where you're going to sleep tonight, are we going to be able to focus on that? No. We have to talk about what we can deal with right now. And we have to start figuring out how do we help them unload the overloaded truck. Because if we don't, we're going to be really ineffective for like figuring out what are solutions for poverty. We're never going to be able to get at those solutions if we don't deal with this overloaded truck first. It can be a really big problem actually in organizations if we have expectations for people that require them to focus on these long-term goals and they're complicated goals before their basic needs are met. So, another example, think about how the challenge of saving money for an apartment for a security deposit when you need to spend the little money you have today to eat because you're hungry, right? You need a place to live, yes. You know you're homeless, you know you need to save money, but also your body's really screaming at you that you're starving. You have to make a decision there. What are you going to do? You're going to eat today. You're starving. So when a young mom comes to New Moms, she may be experiencing trauma, scarcity, toxic stress, housing instability, hunger, transportation scarcity, diaper scarcity, she doesn't have diapers for her kids, basic scarcity there. So the first thing we have to do is help unload the overloaded truck. what can we do to reduce some of those sources of stress that she's experiencing so she can have some of that bandwidth to focus on bigger goals. And then we use a model focused on coaching or using some of those executive skills framework that I showed you to understand the brain science of scarcity and toxic stress. And then when we do that, when we reduce the sources of stress, we start to create some slack for people. They start to have more cognitive bandwidth to plan for and focus on progressing towards longer and more complex goals. And when the stress system starts to calm down, because you're not feeling that toxic stress all the time, right? So it calms down, then you can practice new skills. You can kind of self-regulate a little better. You can learn how to like mitigate some of those weaker executive skills that you have. So maybe you're not super great at organization, but you can learn how to maybe come up with some techniques to get better at that because you can focus on it a little more because your truck isn't so overloaded, right? You have a little more bandwidth to be able to do that. You can develop some positive relationships that will help support you, and these can help to actually mitigate some of the negative effects of scarcity and build resilience to face some of those future obstacles. And this is a really powerful strategy when we work with young parents, like I do at New Moms. That's the population we work with, but it works in lots of populations. At New Moms, we work with young people who are age 24, young women who are age 24 and under. So that's a moment where they have adolescent brains, or young adults, which is largely still considered adolescents, right? Adolescents, and they have new parent brains, and those are developing. And they are also teaching their kids who have brains that are developing too. So it's two generations who are developing simultaneously and building some of those resiliency, moving from that scarcity mindset towards a better sense of like family well-being overall. So the executive skills kind of results in behaviors that make sense in the context of a person's life experience, their stress, their self-regulation skills, and the resources and relationships that they have. Because our skills and our behaviors are always like normal for the situation that we're in at the moment. Strengthening skills and mitigating unhelpful behaviors at any age means that we get to be able to tackle more complex goals and tasks. When we set and achieve short-term goals, we build the muscle for and confidence and motivation in our ability to set and progress towards longer-term goals. Things like buying a house, getting a degree, improving our health. We need to have really strong brain muscles and confidence built up to tackle and progress towards those longer-term goals, just like you're doing right now. You're practicing those skills, you're working towards getting a degree, you're going to take the muscles that you're building through this experience and then be able to use those to tackle bigger goals in the future. So in New Moms, we use all of that framework that I just showed you, that brain science knowledge to inform our model. Now we're a 39-year-old organization. We come out of a faith-based background, that we're a human-based organization in Chicago that's focused on young moms and kids, as I said, that are really focused on putting young moms in really the driver's seat of their experience with us. So as I mentioned, our young moms, when they come to us, are experiencing poverty. About half of them are experiencing homelessness when they show up at our doors. The other half are at risk of that, right? So they are very much in that moment of the overloaded truck, right? They cannot think of anything else but kind of crisis at that moment. But our job is to help them create some of that bandwidth by helping reduce some of those sources of stress in their lives and really allow them to help be the driver of what their goals are. So they help make those decisions about what they want in their lives. They're the primary driver of that. We use this kind of wheel as a guide here. This shows some of the aspects of family well-being that we think are really important in a family's life. So there's things like, your health is important, your education is important, your legal, spirituality, parenting and child development, all of those things all make up all the holistic things that are part of serving a family, because those are all parts of our lives. Now practically, that also means we have some big areas of services that we provide too. So we have a housing program. That means we have actual physical homes for families to live in. So we have 58 apartments that we built where we house families who are experiencing homelessness. We also serve a couple hundred families more at any given time who live out in the community. They could be in shelters, they could be living with relatives on their own, sometimes in cars or other places, just depending on where they are. We have a range of family support programs, which are programs that include things like parent education, and we have doulas. You may know what a doula is. Oh, some people nodded their heads. That makes me happy. Doulas are like trained folks that are trained in the birth process. They're not medical professionals, but they are like birth coaches and advocates. And so we have full-time doulas that do prenatal education and support young moms in the birth process, and then do postpartum support with them. So really helping a young mom through that moment of when she becomes a parent, which is pretty cool. And then we do child development work and parent education through all those early years of a child's life as well too. And then we have a job training program where we work with young moms who are maybe struggling to find or keep employment. Oftentimes they're still working on finishing high school, GED, kind of first levels of education there. Maybe thinking about continuing education also, but helping them to get engaged in a job training and think about their own career planning and vocation planning. Some of the same things we talked about tonight, like what are they thinking about for their vocation and their career as well. One of the things that we do that's connected to that is we operate a social enterprise, which is a small business that we integrated into our work about 10 years ago. The concept of social enterprise is the idea of like having a business with a social mission that both generates revenue, but also operates with this social mission at its core too. So it has this kind of like double bottom line concept, right? Both a social impact and a financial impact at the same time. So we integrated this business called Bright Endeavors. We're a home fragrance company. We make soy candles. I'm being trained now to say home fragrance because now we make reed diffusers also. And so now it's not just candles anymore. So my marketing team would be proud that I just did that. Because we just unveiled the line of reed diffusers, as you can see. But we also make candles. And we sell our candles nationally around the country. Now, that's great. It means we have revenue that we can pump back into the program. It helps to support the program. But importantly, social enterprise also provides really great, consistent quality job training to our young moms. So we pay all the young moms who work at us. It's a job. It's their first job in most instances. And it's a job where they learn really great skills. They get good coaching as well, and it really helps set them up for success in permanent employment after that. Because if you think about it, if you've ever had a job, your first job can be a little rough sometimes, right? You gotta learn how to like operate with coworkers, with the boss, that kind of thing. This is a chance. You also get a chance to practice all those executive skills that we talked about earlier, right? Is there a chance to practice those on the job floor as well? So you can see a picture of some of our participants there. And you can even buy our candles, and this is what I do in commercial, because you can even buy our candles in Wheaton. So the Whole Foods store carries these. I think my Half the Sky might carry these as well here, lovely. So we sell them in little boutiques. We sell them in big chains like Whole Foods, those kinds of places. We do some private label work where we manufacture for other brands as well too. But this is one of the ways in which we can also like extend our impact by using some different economic models in that way. And we integrate our brain science knowledge in the design of this program as well too. But let me tell you about one new program that we just launched that I think also kind of integrates and illustrates a little bit of the brain science approach that I think might help you understand our work. So most of you tonight probably do not fall into the target audience of new moms, unless any of you have a small child with you or at home. But if you were a young mom, and if you were a single mom in America, I would tell you that the likelihood that you are going to graduate from college in Illinois, and actually not even a 4-year degree, but that you were going to complete a 2-year degree. Anybody want to take a guess of what percent likelihood it would be that you would complete that degree? What? I heard a guess. 10%? Any other? 8%. That's the likelihood that you would complete a 2-year degree in 6 years. That's terrible. We can do better than that, right? That's terrible. Because it's so hard. We know that completing college is a huge indicator of your future economic success, of your career trajectory. It's why you're here, right? You're here to get degrees so you can get jobs and so you can have a career. We know how important it is. You know how important it is, of all people. It's a huge indicator. You want to go into professions that are going to give you earning power. We have to figure out how to help single moms, how to help young moms do that as well. They have massive barriers stacked against them to help them finish school. And it's really hard because if you're experiencing poverty and scarcity, it's really hard if you have a child. Childcare, you're often working at the same time, having to navigate, scheduling. With all of those factors, it can feel like you have an overloaded truck really easily, right? Having to manage all of those things, balance all of that together at the same time. So we've long had this challenge at New Moms where we've had graduates of other programs who are interested or trying to do this, and we've been trying to support them in various ways, but really been struggling with this, how do we design a program that would really support young moms who are engaged in, higher education. And it's hard because a lot of our young moms come in, 70% of them have not yet finished high school or finished a GED. So that's the first step, right? We've got to finish that. Well, then once we get from there, how do we help support them with this next piece of the journey? But we think we can do better than 8% in helping them finish. So what can we do? So thinking about brain science and the barriers that are really challenging them. So what are those barriers, right? Well, okay, some tutoring and academic support, that makes sense. Those could be barriers, so we can do that, yes. Supportive relationships, we know that that's actually a really important factor from research. So we can do cohorts, we can have supportive relationships with each other, we can come up with ways to do mentors, we can do that. That makes sense. Childcare, that's a huge issue, so we can figure out some childcare ways to help with that. We can figure that out, okay? That makes sense. We're starting to take some blocks maybe off the truck, right? We're starting to figure out some things. Okay, that works. What else can we do that would help to really create a little bit of slack in people's lives and allow them to focus on those bigger goals? Here's the big thing you can do. Here's what research really shows us we can do. Cash. Money. Just give them some money so they don't have to work 2 jobs or 3 jobs at the same time as going to school, because that's actually what people need, right? So we're providing a $500 a month cash stipend to go along with this new program. Right now, $500 is not enough for anyone to live off of, so it's not like they're going to suddenly stop working. But what it might allow somebody to do is to only work 1 job instead of 2. It might be just enough money to give them enough slack to be able to study for the test that's coming up, or spend some time with their child, or create just a little bit more room in their life to be able to push past the other barriers to be a little bit more successful. Giving them enough slack to have that cognitive bandwidth that they need in their lives. So we're testing it out. There's lots of research that's shown that cash stipends like this make a huge impact in people's ability to achieve their goals. Yet no one's tested it yet in an academic setting like this, so we're testing it out in a partnership program with the City Colleges of Chicago for 25 young moms who are in 2-year degree programs. We're going to see how it works. We're studying this. But I'll tell you, I had a conversation on Friday with a young mom who's in our cohort that just started this January. Her name is Micah. And she was great. She's super excited. She's the first person in her family to go to college. And she's got a 1-year-old son. And she has been trying to go to college slowly for a year and a half. And she's been taking a class at a time, right? And she's working on this. And she's had all these struggles with childcare because her child's daycare keeps getting shut down because of COVID. And so then she's trying to figure that out. She doesn't have a lot of family she trusts to watch her child. And so she's trying to navigate, how does she do this? She's working 2 jobs and trying to navigate that and going to school at the same time. And so she was telling me that she had come up with some better plans because of this, being in the program, and because of the stipend, she's able to get down to 1 job. So she's now I am not working these crazy nighttime hours, and so I'm actually able to study, and I think this is going to work better, which is all great. And what I loved was, and this is something so simple, but I said, well, how is can you give me an example of like some of a success? Because she said, I feel so much more hopeful because I'm having all these successes. And I said, well, tell me about like a success that you feel like you're having already. Like, what is it? Because it's only been like 4 weeks. Like, what are we doing so far? And she said, it's so great. She goes, this week I accomplished all of my short-term goals. And I was like, well, what are those? And she said, well, I was not living out of my laundry baskets this week. That was so huge for me. She goes, my house has been in just like her apartment. She goes, it's been in disarray, and I've been living out of like laundry baskets, and I got everything put away, and I got all these things accomplished, and I finally like felt like I could study, and because I could like find things, and I could do it. Now that's like a little thing, but it's not really a little thing, right? Like that's a big step forward, because she was able to use some of those executive skills. So she's like, and she goes, organization is one of my struggles. She told me, and I was like, okay, I hear that. And she goes, but now I'm learning how to do it. Like just a little bit of slack. Just gave her just enough to be able to like get over that hump, right? So, that's not gonna solve all the problems in Micah's world. It's not, but it's just enough to get her over that hump a little bit. Like we have to think about that kind of thing in designing programs. So I have lots of hope for Micah because I actually think like she's getting some momentum on those short-term goals, and that's the kind of thing that over time leads to long-term success. Because the thing about poverty work is that like you do not solve it in 12 weeks. No one goes from being poor to being like middle class and having all their problems solved in some short-term 12-week fix-it program. That's not how it works. It's generational, it's complicated, it's hard, and it takes hard, long-term work to get out of it. And you have to be willing to like stick with it for the long term. And so we have to be willing to do this kind of investment long term in organizations and in people in order to make that change happen. Organizations have lots of different ways of addressing poverty, and we have different approaches because we have different populations. I gave you some examples tonight of what we do at New Moms, which is with young moms. That's certainly like a really niche population. Other organizations serve older adults or kids or other families or individuals. Different aspects for different populations. Because poverty is complex, there's going to be more than one solution along the way. But you have to think about how are you addressing some of the root causes and address it from multiple angles. When New Moms was founded, and I'll put up our information here. When New Moms was founded, it was almost 40 years ago. We were founded in Humboldt Park by a woman, our founder. Her name was Ellen, and she was founded in the community. Her husband was a pastor, and it was like really humble beginnings. She saw there were young women in her community who had babies who were living in abandoned buildings and cars. And she was like, you know what, that's not okay. That's not okay in my community. And I don't really know what I'm going to do about it, but that's not okay. And so she bought some diapers and some formula, and she put it in the trunk of her car, and she thought, well, I'm going to give it out, and then I'm going to, and she says this with a laugh as she tells the story, and then I'm going to connect them to other organizations. And so she did that, and then she was like, oh, shoot, there's nowhere to connect them to. Right? And that was really New Moms founding, was that she started off by just responding to the need. She was just like, this isn't okay. I'm going to do something about it. It was really humble beginnings. We started in the early 80s, like this was 83, around the time where a lot of organizations did start because there was this real rise in homelessness in Chicago. And so, that was the start then. She had no idea then what it would become down the road, right? We just kept growing because we just kept responding to the next thing as an organization of like, okay, well then I guess we need to get some apartments, and I guess we need to house people, and I guess we need to do job training because that's the next thing. And we just have kept kind of growing organically because of that. But it really all started from that moral conviction place of, and really what I would say is like that holy stirring of like the Holy Spirit inside of her saying like, this isn't okay, and I should do something about that. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but it's not okay. And as a Christian, I need to do something about that. And I think for all of us who think social justice maybe should be woven into our vocations in some way, if you have that moral conviction and then faith conviction in some ways that injustice isn't okay, then you have to take that leadership responsibility in your own life to figure out, well, how am I going to weave that in to my life? Like whatever your professional journey is ahead. And here's my final plea that I will give you as well. If you feel like you are called to enter a career of doing full-time helping work in an organization like a Moms or another nonprofit, a similar organization, then I hope you go all in. I hope you leave it all on the table. Because if you go into this work, you need to bring excellence to this work. You need to give it 100%, and you need to show up every single day with your A game. This is not a profession for people who can't cut it somewhere else. This is a profession for people who are brilliant, or who bring their A game to the table every day because they care so deeply about this work. If you want a gig that's a little bit easier, or if you want to work at a cool tech company where they have snacks all the time, and I understand that. That is a nice perk. If you want to do that, then know that about yourself and plan accordingly. Because this work matters so much, and we really need the best people doing this. We need the best and the brightest people doing this. You know, I tell my team at New Moms a lot, like when we're struggling with things, well, if this were easy, somebody else would have already done it, right? Because we're dealing with the hardest problems. Poverty is like hard. These are intractable, hard problems. And we need the brightest, the best, the most brilliant people and minds together trying to solve those. We don't need the people that can't cut it somewhere else, right? We need the best people doing this work. And so I hope you keep that in mind, that if you are ready to be a rock star, then I hope you go do this work full time, because we would love that. And if it's not your life's calling to this work full time, that's great too, because you still can do this work wherever your job is. You can weave this into your vocation, whatever that is, because you don't get off the hook of caring about injustice. Because if you're a Christian, like, this is part of your vocation. This is part of your life's calling, and so you have to weave it in some way. You have to think about what that looks like for you, and weave that in whatever way God allows it to be. But there is a place for you doing this work, whatever your role is. There's a spot for you, and so I hope you think about where is social justice in your full-time, whether it's your full-time vocation and you're all in on it, or if it's not, where is the space that you will weave that in. And then you'll think about where is those moments where your heart really does have those moments where you go, oh, I really feel something. Or maybe you have moments like me where you go, what the? Like, right? And you dig in there. Figure out the things that make you really passionate, or you really care about those things, and you weave those in. And it may not be your profession, but whatever it is, that you weave social justice into your life in a way, and that you have a chance to lead from a place that really values justice and loving others. So let me pause there, and I'll be happy to take questions if there are any.
Yeah. Earlier on, you said that most social justice professions are feminized, and then because of that, they're taken less seriously.
Yeah.
How have you seen that in your workplace, and then how has that affected your personal faith journey?
Yeah, well, they definitely are feminized. Interestingly, if you look at like nonprofits as a whole in the sector, you'll see that like 70% of employees are actually women. So just if you looked at like the labor statistics, they are. Interestingly, as you look at like the statistics on entry level versus like management positions, it gets more male as it goes up. So they're more heavily male management positions, which is very fascinating. And it's not unusual as like a CEO for me to go into a room of other, especially large nonprofit organizations, and for me to be the only female CEO, which I find to be fascinating when it's like a largely female-dominated industry. So that's really interesting. So I certainly have like felt that in lots of instances, which I think is interesting. I had kind of an interesting situation at New Moms. Now, I will tell you, it's really hard for me to recruit men to work at a place called New Moms, fascinatingly enough. So we are a largely female-dominated place. I do have a few men in the workforce, but it's almost all, and at times it has been all women. That is not intentional. We love to have men in the workforce too, but it's really hard to get men to even apply to work at a place called New Moms. And so we've just always been a really heavily female place. I was a little like, I wonder how this will be when I started working there, like, because I'd never worked in a place that was entirely like female run and led. And I thought, I'll see how this is. It's been great. Like, I mean, it's been fabulous. But I frequently hear from our newer staff who come and they're like, oh, and I find this comment so fascinating. It's such a comment on society. They're like, I did not know what this is going to be like, having a female CEO or a female executive leadership team, or what that was going to be like, or an all-female. And people are like, it's so great, but I didn't know. And I think that's really interesting. So interesting comment on just like people's experience around it. But I mean, it's just largely, it's women tend to be in the more like direct service, entry-level positions, and then it tends to become more male as it goes up. Yeah.
Can I know like how you guys are like getting funding and stuff, like the funding system?
The question was about how are we getting funding? Yeah, so we are a whole conglomeration of funding, which is not really terribly unusual for nonprofit organizations. We have about, pardon me, about half of our funding, not quite, is from government sources. That's a combination of like federal, state, local, a whole bunch of different sources within that. About 10% of our revenue is earned revenue from our social enterprise. About 15% is foundation revenue, so grants from foundations. And the other, what is that, there's 10%? Yeah, 15% is from individual donors. So fundraising, lots of, individual donors, events, that kind of thing. Yeah, so it's a combination. So there's a whole back end, when I mentioned earlier, like, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of jobs and organizations. Like, it's not just social workers. It's not just people who, yes, there's a whole team of coaches. We have a whole team of coaches that work with our young moms, but then there's this whole other set of jobs behind the scenes that, especially for an organization like our size, that have to make it run, right? So we have a whole team of like fundraisers and folks who do marketing and communications, and we have a social enterprise team that run our business, right? Like our candle business. And we have a whole, we have folks that do all kinds of jobs that aren't social workers or anything even like that remotely that also help make the whole operation run as part of that. And our fundraising team would be part of that as well.
This is kind of like going off my question, but like we all have this like kind of idea what it means to serve the poor. So like how has like your experience at New Wells like changed your view of what it means to serve the poor? Or like what makes a good institution that serves the poor? What makes a good nonprofit or good effective?
So the question was about what makes reflection on like serving the poor and what makes a good organization serve the poor. So a couple thoughts there. I mean, I think we have a deep responsibility to be responsive to our community that we're in. It's a little tricky for us because we serve a really big area. So our headquarters is located in the west side of Chicago in the Austin neighborhood. So we make a really intentional commitment to be engaged in the Austin community because that's where we're located. And we can do that, and also it's a little tricky because we have folks coming from all over the city, right? So we're like, we're in Austin, but we're also citywide, so it's a little bit tricky in terms of like our geographic footprint there. But we have a real responsibility to be part of that community where we are, and the community that we're in has like experienced a lot of disinvestment and has some significant challenges. And so we are part of that, and part of we're living that life along with that community and experiencing the ups and downs right along with them too. And I think that's part of our responsibility is to like be part of that community and live that with them. And so I think that's important with it. I also think, and I didn't mention this today, but like our participants have to help guide us in what, I talked for a minute about how like they're in the driver's seat of, obviously they're coming to us, but they're in the driver's seat, then I'm like, what are we doing? We're there to help. We can provide some tools and some supports and their systems and all those things, but they're driving what they want. We're not saying, here's what you need to do. We're saying, what are your goals? Let's start with your hopes and dreams and goals. Let's start there, and then we can help you get there. But they also need to help speak into this. And so like we have this really active and great group of young moms that are graduates that we call our Parent Advisory Council. And they're great, and they help speak into like our program design, and they help speak into like all kinds of things about our organization. And I think for me, it's been about learning also, like they're brilliant, and they have all these wonderful ideas and things to share, and like they are just as smart and brilliant as I am, right? And as anyone else is, and like how we value them and and the humility that we have to have, because it's easy for us to come in as experts and to say like, oh, we know, because we went to school, and we read this in a book, and we know what's best for you, because I'm not poor, so then therefore I know. And for us as an organization, not to have that posture, but to instead, to come alongside them. And that's why we even use language like, you're a coach, you're not a case manager, or you're not, we're really intentional about some of the ways in which we even like try to set up the dynamics of those relationships in our organizations. I think those have been really important lessons. And I think we've learned those as an organization over time too. Those are ongoing lessons, right? And for me personally, that's been ongoing. Like, how do I continually get put in my place about that, right? As I think, as I learn that and think about that more and more about, I don't think I would survive 24 hours being a young mom, right? I think it's that hard. I am in such awe of their persistence and of their amazingness to like get up every day and to do a really, really hard job. And so I have a ton of respect for them. And I think, we have to be in a place then that we can acknowledge that and recognize it and treat them with that kind of respect too. So I think there's a lot of humility there that we have to learn. And as an organization, that we also have to show, and that has to work its way through our organizational culture and posture also towards them. Yeah.
Hi. Do you have any good examples of how people can integrate social justice into their jobs if they're not full-time social justice workers? Like, for example, I'm interested in medicine, so I think of maybe like advocating in meetings or something, but do you have any other examples of like working towards maybe systemic changes and not just individual interactions?
Yeah, it's great. So the question is about how could you integrate social justice maybe in your job, like medicine, for example, if you're not in full-time work. I think there's so many good ways to do this, right? So part of it is like having an attuned ear and listening for those opportunities as they come up in your work, whatever that is, because they will come up, because you're going to be sitting in a meeting with other people at some point, and somebody's going to say something that's really wrong, and you're going to be like, no, hold on, right? You're going to challenge something in the moment, maybe, and that actually is part of it, right? Is speaking up. Maybe they say something that maybe isn't even like so off the wall, but you're like, well, is that really right, or isn't it? Like, maybe, maybe they say something that, maybe it's overtly racist, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just something that really is something that's kind of detrimental towards the poor, right? Or really like shortchanges somebody, and you're like, I don't know if that's really right, and you challenge the thinking on it in the moment. Or you call out, like, is there some bias here in the way we're thinking about this new system we're going to put in place? Or you ask some questions about, as you're thinking about rolling out a new program or something, and you're thinking about who is this going to affect and how are we going to do this? And, have we thought through all these questions about, like, is this going to have, like, some sort of impact on people who are low income or people who aren't, right? Like, there's so many ways in which I think if you come at it with a lens of, like, I also care about people who may be in poverty, right? Or I also care about those who have been marginalized. Like, you will have opportunities to ask those questions in the course of your work, both in the work that you control directly, when you're designing something, when you're planning something, when you're responsible for it, or when you're interacting with others. It's amazing when you're out in the world how many opportunities there really are for that. And I think all of us have those opportunities. Also, you end up in jobs at companies, especially if you're in for-profit companies, you end up in jobs where companies are like, how can, we do this thing for our full-time day job, and then how can we do some good on the side? And apparently, this is what I hear, people are just looking at each other in these companies, like, how can we do some good? I don't know, do you know anybody? I don't know, and I know this because people who are on boards and stuff are like, oh my gosh, my company's trying to figure out who to give some money to. I'm like, I can't fathom this, right? I can't fathom that people are sitting around with money that they don't know what to do with. Because I can always find things to do with people's money. But you can also be like, I know 12 good places to give that money to, right? You can be like, I know great organizations to be part of. And you can have all these opportunities for service on the side that you can still do and be engaged in. One of the best things you can do is you start your like professional journeys, and you can do this, like graduate college and you move into your 20s and you can go beyond, like get involved with organizations, start volunteering somewhere, get involved. Lots of organizations have like young professional boards, or sometimes they're called junior boards, or young professional boards, or associate boards. Like we have one that we call associate board. It's lots of people in their 20s and 30s. They're a great time. They're a great time. There are all these like really cool people. They're actually great networking opportunities for you. But they also like come together with people who care about a certain cause, and they do like volunteering and fundraising and things for an organization. That's a great way to be engaged in a cause you care about, right? Often you can like have chances then to like think about how does your company that you work for get connected to your organization that you care about too. Like we have this huge associate board in Mountain, so like 60 people. They work in all kinds of companies. They're always doing all kinds of cool stuff for us. It's awesome. We have to do very little with them. They're so fabulous. And they just do all these great things because there are all these people who are really fired up about the cause, and they're like, this is not their day job. They don't work at New Moms. They work at like Google and other great places, right? But they're like, but I want to do something because I really care about this. And they find ways then just naturally to get people engaged in it or to do that as part of their work. So that is like one really concrete thing you can do is like, once you get into your career and you have a little space in your life, it's not a huge lift, but like find an organization like that you can get engaged in. It's also a great career thing to do. And then eventually, as your career moves on, think about volunteering and being engaged in like a board of directors, which is like the governing board for a nonprofit organization. Because all nonprofits have a governing board that make the decisions. Think about being engaged there, using your skills. Volunteer your skills, especially if you have professional skills that you can engage in a way that are meaningful. If you're a lawyer, you can do pro bono legal services. If you're you get all kinds of persons. If you're in medicine, like we have doctors that do great like prenatal sessions, like education sessions for, as part of our prenatal classes and stuff. Like you can find cool ways to volunteer and be engaged and use your skill sets in all kinds of ways. So everybody can do something in it. I think it's just about if like if you use that lens and seek it out.
I think we have time for about one more question here.
All right. Any others? Okay.
Okay.
All right, well, I put up here, this is our information. You can follow us, because that's what I'm supposed to say. And it would be great if you did also, but you should especially follow us, and you hopefully found your favorite new candle company, home fragrance company, tonight. Home fragrance company tonight, great endeavors as well. And then I'll put up, this is my contact information as well too. My email's on there. I'm always happy to take questions, or if you didn't want to ask me something today, feel free to email me too. It was a delight to be with you. Thank you.